I want you to understand something right from the start. This isn't a story about forgiveness or redemption or any of that therapeutic garbage people love to sell you. This is about the day I walked into my own house and found my brother sleeping with my fiancée in the bed I paid for, and how that single moment burned down everything I thought I knew about loyalty. What happened after that wasn't revenge, it was just math, cold numbers that added up to exactly what everyone deserved. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself with dramatic music or slow motion. It's Wednesday afternoon, you're home early because the concrete supplier screwed up the delivery schedule, and you walk through your front door into a smell that doesn't belong there. Cologne. Not mine. Mixed with Laura's perfume in a way that made my engineer brain immediately start calculating probabilities I didn't want to confirm. The bedroom door was half open. I stood in my own hallway for maybe 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds, my entire life rearranged itself into before and after. My brother Evan was in my bed with my fiancée. Not just any bed, the one I'd assembled myself, in the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 3 years, while Evan floated between jobs and creative projects that never went anywhere. They were asleep, tangled up like they'd done this before, like they were comfortable. That detail hit harder than the actual sight of them, that comfort level. This wasn't a drunken mistake or a moment of weakness. This was routine. I didn't wake them up. I didn't yell or throw things or do any of the dramatic nonsense you see in movies. I just stood there and felt something fundamental shift in my chest, like a load-bearing wall cracking. Then I walked to my office, unplugged my external hard drive with all my work projects, grabbed my gun-safe keys, took my Glock and my documents folder, and left. Evan woke up as I was leaving the bedroom. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? The numbers were already calculated. He was dead to me, not metaphorically, but in the same way you delete a corrupted file. Just gone. I sat in my truck in the driveway in the Texas heat and blocked both their numbers before I even started the engine. Laura called 16 times in the first hour. Evan called 9. I watched the notifications pop up on my phone like watching insects hit a windshield. None of it touched me. I drove to a motel near the construction site, checked in for a week, and went to the gym. I stayed there until my arms shook and my vision tunneled. Pain I could control, pain I could understand. The text messages started coming through email, through social media, through every digital crack they could find. Laura's were predictable. I'm sorry, it was a mistake. We need to talk. You don't understand. Evan's were worse because they tried to be reasonable. Bro, let's handle this like adults. It just happened. You're overreacting. That word. Overreacting. Like finding your family member screwing your fiancé in your house was something that required measured response and thoughtful consideration. I didn't respond to any of it. I hired a lawyer instead, broke the lease on the house since it was only in my name anyway, ate the penalty because it was worth it to never set foot in there again. Canceled the wedding, which was easy because I'd paid all the deposits. Lost some money but gained clarity. Found out Laura had been telling people I was emotionally distant and always working for months before I caught them. The groundwork for justification, the narrative preparation. She'd been planning her story before she even needed it. 3 weeks after I moved out, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I made the mistake of answering. She wanted me to come to dinner, to talk things through, to work this out as a family. I asked her if she knew. The silence on the other end told me everything. She knew. My father knew. My sister knew. They'd all known, or suspected, or heard something and decided not to tell me because it might cause problems. I hung up on her mid-sentence, explaining how Evan was going through a hard time and made a mistake. That's when I understood the full scope of it. This wasn't just about Laura and Evan. This was about a family structure where I'd always been the responsible one, the fixer, the stable foundation everyone else built their chaos on top of. Evan was the golden child, the one with potential who just needed more time, more chances, more understanding. I was the workhorse who'd be fine, who'd get over it, who'd forgive, because that's what family does. I didn't go to Thanksgiving. I didn't go to Christmas. In December, my sister showed up at my new apartment, the one nobody was supposed to have the address for. Someone had talked. She stood in my doorway and delivered the family intervention speech. Everyone makes mistakes. Evan feels terrible. Laura's a mess. The holidays are ruined. Don't I care about family unity? Don't I want to heal? I let her finish. Then I asked her a simple question. If someone stole from her, if someone broke into her house and took her most valuable possession, would she invite them to Christmas dinner? She started explaining how it wasn't the same thing, how relationships are more complicated than property, how I was being too black and white about it. I closed the door while she was still talking. Blood relation doesn't mean anything when the blood itself is poison. Christmas Day, they sent me a group text with a photo of everyone around the table. Evan and Laura were both there. My parents, my sister, some cousins, all smiling at the camera like everything was fine. There was an empty chair that I knew was supposed to make me feel guilty. Instead, I felt liberated. That empty chair was proof I'd successfully extracted myself from the infection. I blocked all their numbers, every single one. Christmas in Austin was 72 degrees. I went to the gun range and put 200 rounds through my Glock with groups so tight they could have been one hole. January hit Austin like it always did, cold fronts that couldn't make up their minds. I'd been working 70-hour weeks on a hospital expansion project, supervising foundation work, pulling double shifts because the project manager was an idiot who couldn't read blueprints. One of the guys on the crew, older guy named Frank from Montana, kept talking about Bozeman, how it was cold and clean and empty, how you could work yourself to exhaustion and the wind would blow all your thoughts away, how nobody asked questions because everyone up there was running from something. I put in applications to 3 firms in Montana, had offers from 2 within a week. Took the one in Bozeman because Frank said the mountains there made you feel small enough that your problems got perspective. I gave my Austin firm 2 weeks' notice. My boss tried to counter-offer. I told him there was nothing he could offer that would make me stay in Texas. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Maybe that was the point. Bozeman in February was everything Frank had promised and worse in the best way. The cold wasn't like Texas cold, wasn't something you could tough out with a jacket. This was cold that wanted you dead, cold that required respect. I rented a cabin 40 minutes outside town, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor was a mile away and the main visitors were elk and occasionally a black bear. The first night I spent there, the temperature dropped to 15 below zero. The pipes froze. I spent 4 hours with a heat gun thawing them out, fingers numb, back aching, and I felt better than I had in months. The job was bridge construction, massive infrastructure project connecting 2 valleys. 12-hour days, minimum, often 14, sometimes 16 when the weather cooperated. We worked in temperatures that made your tools brittle, where metal contracted and measurements changed by fractions that mattered. I'd come back to the cabin so tired I'd fall asleep still in my work clothes. This was exactly what I needed. No time to think, no energy to feel. I stopped drinking completely. Not because I had a problem, but because I didn't want any fog. I wanted to feel everything, process everything, make sure I learned the lesson fully. Alcohol was what weak people used to forget. I wanted to remember every single second of what betrayal looked like so I'd never miss the signs again. The guys at work thought I was weird. The engineer who didn't drink beer after shift, who went to the gym at 9 at night instead of the bar. I didn't care what they thought. Their opinions weren't load-bearing. Weekends were for maintenance. The cabin needed work, constant work. Roof leaked. Foundation had cracks. Furnace made sounds like it was plotting murder. I fixed all of it myself, YouTube and determination. Physical problems with physical solutions. No ambiguity, no hidden motives. A leak either stopped or it didn't. A crack either got filled or it spread. Simple. I lost 20 pounds of fat and gained it back in muscle. Started running in the mountains even when it was snowing, 5 miles minimum, pushing until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to quit. At the gun range, I practiced until my groupings were tournament level. This wasn't about becoming dangerous. This was about control. Control over my body, my space, my reactions. Everything Laura and Evan had taken from me, I was rebuilding with better materials. March through June was a blur of concrete and steel and weather that couldn't decide if it was winter or spring. I didn't date. I didn't socialize beyond work necessities. A couple of the guys invited me to barbecues, to fishing trips. I went to one fishing trip, spent 8 hours in silence on a river, caught nothing, and felt more peaceful than I'd felt in a year. The silence was perfect. Nobody asking how I was feeling, nobody trying to fix me, nobody expecting emotional processing or growth or any of that therapy speak nonsense. My phone was basically dead. Email was work only. Social media deleted. I'd created a perfectly sterile existence. Some people might call it lonely. I called it clean. Every morning I woke up without obligations to people who'd proven they didn't respect me was a morning I'd won. The sunrise over the mountains was better than any relationship I'd ever had. It showed up on time and didn't expect anything back. Then September came with the first real cold snap. I was working on foundation calculations for the bridge's western approach when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Montana area code. Could have been work-related. I answered it. It was Laura. Her voice was different, smaller, like she'd been crying recently or was about to. She said my name like a question. Nathan? Like she wasn't sure it was really me, like I might have died and been replaced. I almost hung up immediately, but something made me wait. Call it morbid curiosity. Call it needing to know if she'd somehow gotten worse. She said she was in Bozeman. She said we needed to talk. She said it was important, life or death important. I asked her how she got my number. She said she'd called every construction company in Bozeman until one receptionist recognized my name. I asked her what she wanted. She started crying, said she couldn't do this over the phone, said she was at a motel near the hospital, said please. I hung up, blocked the number, went back to my calculations. But the concentration was shot. She was here, in Montana, in my city, in my clean space. It was contamination. It was violation. I left work early, told my supervisor I had a family emergency, which was accurate if you defined emergency as needing to remove a tumor. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up to knocking. Not phone calls, actual knocking on my cabin door. I looked through the window and there she was, Laura, standing on my porch in a coat too thin for Montana, shivering and very clearly pregnant. The belly wasn't huge, but it was there, unmistakable, maybe 5 or 6 months along. She looked terrible. No makeup, hair pulled back, face red from cold and crying. She looked like someone who'd been living in her car. Behind her, I could see a beat-up Honda Civic with Texas plates, one headlight out, covered in road salt and dirt. She saw me at the window and started talking, voice muffled through the glass. "Please, Nathan, please just talk to me. I need help. I'm pregnant. It's yours. Evan left me. Everyone left me. I have nowhere to go. Please." The script was so predictable it was almost boring. Damsel in distress, man as savior, appeal to masculine protective instinct. The problem was she was working with outdated software. I wasn't the Nathan who'd proposed to her. That version died in a bedroom in Austin. This version was a different build entirely. I didn't open the door. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the window. She kept talking, kept begging. She said she'd made a terrible mistake. She said Evan had manipulated her. She said the pregnancy was from one time we'd been together before I found out. She said she'd tried to find me sooner but didn't know where I was. She said she was sorry. I opened the door exactly 6 inches, kept the chain lock engaged, told her we'd talk, but not here. Told her there was a coffee shop in town, neutral territory. Told her to meet me there in 2 hours. She looked pathetically grateful. Started to reach for my hand. I stepped back and closed the door. Watched through the camera as she walked back to her car, got in, sat there for a minute, then drove away. I didn't go to the coffee shop. Instead, I went to my lawyer, the same one who'd handled my lease termination in Austin. I explained the situation. He nodded like he'd heard it 1,000 times. He gave me a business card for a DNA testing lab in Bozeman. He explained non-invasive prenatal paternity testing. Blood draw from the mother, comparison with father's DNA, results in a week. He said, "Don't acknowledge anything, don't promise anything, don't give her money. Treat it like a business transaction because that's what she was trying to make it." I called Laura from the lawyer's parking lot. She answered immediately. I told her I'd pay for the DNA test. If it was mine, we'd discuss support through lawyers. If it wasn't, she needed to leave Montana and never contact me again. She tried to argue. Said she didn't need a test, said she knew it was mine, said I was being cruel. I told her these were the terms. She could accept them, or I'd get a restraining order for harassment. She went quiet, then agreed. The test was done on Monday. Lab tech was professional, didn't ask questions. Drew Laura's blood, took my cheek swab, said results in 7 to 10 business days. Laura tried to talk to me in the parking lot after, tried to explain how hard things had been, how Evan had promised to leave his new girlfriend for her, then didn't, how my parents had taken Evan's side, how she'd lost her job, how she had nobody. I listened without responding, then asked her one question. Whose idea was it to come to Montana? She hesitated too long. That hesitation told me everything. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. She'd been sent or she'd coordinated with someone. I asked her where she was staying. She said the motel near the hospital. I told her I'd pay for 1 week. After that, she needed to figure it out. She started crying again. I got in my truck and left. The week waiting for results was the longest week since I'd left Texas. I kept working, kept my routine, but there was static in my head. Part of me knew it couldn't be mine. We'd been careful, and the timeline didn't line up right. But another part, the part that remembered who I used to be, wondered if maybe I'd miscalculated. If maybe there was a chance I'd be tied to Laura forever through a child. On the 8th day, the lab called. Results were in. I drove there during lunch break, sat in the small consultation room while a genetic counselor in a cardigan pulled up the file. She looked at me with professional sympathy and said, "Probability of paternity, 0%. Not just unlikely, not just improbable, impossible." I thanked her, walked out, Sat in my truck in the parking lot and felt absolutely nothing. No relief, no anger, just confirmation of what I'd already known. The child was Evan's. Had to be. Laura had known that. She'd come to Montana knowing that, banking on the chance I wouldn't test it, that I'd just accept it based on our history. This wasn't a mistake or confusion. This was fraud. This was attempted entrapment. She'd tried to lock me into 18 years of paying for another man's child, specifically my brother's child, the product of their betrayal. The calculation was simple. Find the sucker with stable income and emotional attachment, sell him the pregnancy, secure the bag. I sat there for 20 minutes just letting it process. Then I called my lawyer, asked him what my legal obligations were. He said none. 0. I had the DNA proof. She had no claim on me. I could walk away completely. I asked him about restraining orders. He said if she contacted me again, we could pursue it. I thanked him and hung up. Then I did something I'd been planning since the day she showed up. I opened my laptop, logged into my secure email, and started composing a message. Not to Laura, not to Evan, to everyone else. I attached the DNA test results. I attached screenshots of Laura's initial messages claiming the child was mine. I attached a timeline of events. I wrote a single paragraph of context. No emotions, no judgments, just facts. This is what happened. This is what was attempted. This is the proof. The recipient list took me 15 minutes to compile. My parents, my sister, Evan's last known email, Laura's parents, the extended family group chat I'd been removed from but still had the contact list for HR at Evan's company, where he'd managed to land another job despite being fired from the last one. And, for good measure, the new girlfriend Evan had apparently been dating while Laura was pregnant. I read it through 3 times, checking for any emotional language, anything that could be dismissed as vindictive. It was clean, clinical, just a man stating facts and providing evidence. I put my finger on the send button and felt the same calm I felt before pulling a trigger at the range. Perfect control, perfect focus. I hit send. Then I drove to the motel where Laura was staying. She wasn't there. The desk clerk said she'd checked out that morning. Her car was gone from the parking lot. I drove past the bus station. Her car was in the lot there, hood up, clearly broken down. I kept driving. Not my problem anymore. The responses started coming in within an hour. My phone, which I'd switched off silent for this specific purpose, started vibrating continuously. I let it buzz. I was at the gun range. I put 300 rounds through my Glock, with groups so tight the instructor came over to watch. He asked if I was training for competition. I told him I was training for peace of mind. That night, I finally looked at the messages. My mother had sent 17 texts, each one more frantic, begging me to take it down, to stop this, to think about the family. My sister called me a monster. My father sent a voice memo, 3 minutes of him trying to sound authoritative, demanding I retract everything immediately. Evan sent nothing, which told me he was in damage control mode. Laura's mother sent me a message that actually made me pause. It just said, "We taught her better than this. I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses, no defense. Just acknowledgement and apology. I appreciated the efficiency of it. The extended family group chat had exploded. Cousins I hadn't talked to in years suddenly had opinions. Some supported me. Some thought I was being vindictive. Some wanted to know more details. The beautiful thing about truth is it doesn't need defending. I didn't respond to any of it. The facts were there. People could make their own conclusions. The real damage came from the HR email. Evan's company had strict moral clauses in their employment contracts, Attempting to defraud a family member, especially with forged paternity claims, was exactly the kind of reputational risk they didn't want. He was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. His girlfriend, who apparently had no idea about Laura or the pregnancy, dumped him via social media. That part was public and messy. Laura disappeared for 2 weeks. No calls, no messages, nothing. I figured she'd gone back to Texas or found somewhere else to leech. Then my father showed up. He drove to Montana in October, showed up at my cabin at 6 in the morning. I watched him through my security camera, standing on the porch in wind that was already below freezing, knocking, calling my name. He looked old, actually old, not just older, like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. He was wearing a jacket insufficient for Montana cold, shivering, but he kept standing there. I didn't open the door. I watched him through the camera and felt nothing. He knocked for 20 minutes. Then he sat on the porch steps. Then he started talking to the closed door, loud enough for me to hear if I'd been inside listening, which I wasn't because I'd left through the back door before he arrived. He spent 3 hours there, drove back to town, came back the next day. Same routine. This time he left a note. It was on my porch when I got home from work, handwritten on motel stationery. It said he understood why I was angry. It said he should have told me about the affair when he first suspected. It said he'd chosen the wrong son to protect. It said, "Please forgive me." I burned the note in my fireplace, watched the paper curl and blacken. Forgiveness isn't something you grant to people who bet against you. Forgiveness is what weak people trade for temporary peace. I didn't need peace with my father. I had peace without him. He stayed in Bozeman for a week, showing up at my cabin every day. I was never there. I changed my work schedule, stayed late on site, went to the gym at different times. On day 7, he left a final note. This one said he was going back to Texas. It said Evan and Laura were living in their basement with the baby. It said it was hell. It said I'd won. It said he hoped I was happy. The word won stuck with me, like this had been a competition, like I'd orchestrated some elaborate victory instead of just refusing to be a victim. I hadn't won anything. I'd just stopped losing. November in Montana brought the first serious snow. The bridge project was ahead of schedule. My supervisor pulled me aside and asked if I'd be interested in a permanent position, possibly project management. I said yes. He seemed surprised, like he'd expected me to have bigger ambitions. I didn't tell him that stability was the biggest ambition I had now. Thanksgiving came and went. Christmas approached. I bought myself a new rifle, a Remington 700 in .308. Took it to the range and zeroed it at 200 yards. Spent Christmas Day in my cabin with a fire going, a steak on the grill, and absolutely nobody asking me how I was feeling or if I'd considered reconciliation. Through the family grapevine, which I monitored through a cousin who still talked to me, I heard updates. Evan was working minimum wage at a warehouse. Laura was working fast food. They were fighting constantly. The baby had colic. My parents were bankrupt from supporting them and trying to maintain their image in the community. My sister had stopped talking to all of them because the drama was too much. The house in Austin finally sold in January. I'd been covering the mortgage remotely for months just to keep it from foreclosure, taking the financial hit because my credit mattered more than the money. The sale went through. Closing costs eaten up most of the profit, but I walked away clear. I took the remaining money and bought the cabin I'd been renting, paid cash, owned it outright. 0 debt, 0 obligations. My lawyer sent me a final notice in February. Laura had attempted to file for child support in Texas, listing me as the father. The court had requested DNA evidence. My lawyer had submitted our test results. Case dismissed. Laura was now facing potential fraud charges if the state decided to pursue it. My lawyer asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no. The system was punishing her fine on its own. I didn't need to pile on. I just needed her gone from my life permanently. March brought a thaw. The mountains started showing green beneath the snow. The bridge project was finishing up, final inspections scheduled for April. I'd been in Montana for 14 months. I'd had exactly 3 conversations that weren't about work. I'd been on 0 dates. I'd made 0 friends. My life was a straight line between my cabin and the job site, with occasional stops at the gym and gun range. Some people would call this lonely. I called it exactly what I'd paid for. No surprises, no betrayals, no family members sleeping with my fiancée, no parents choosing the wrong kid, no cousins asking me to be reasonable, just mountains and cold and work and the rifle range and complete, total, perfect silence. One of the new guys on the crew, kid named Jake, fresh out of college, asked me one day why I moved to Montana. I told him I liked the cold. He laughed, thought I was joking, said nobody actually likes this kind of cold. I didn't correct him. How do you explain to a 23-year-old that sometimes you need cold that matches what's inside you? That sometimes you need a place where survival itself requires focus, leaving no room for the past? April came with mud season, everything thawing and turning into soup. The bridge passed final inspection with 0 corrections needed. My boss took the crew out for drinks. I went, nursed 1 beer for 3 hours, left early. Jake was drunk, told me I was the most competent and terrifying person he'd ever met. I took it as a compliment. May marked 18 months since I'd left Texas. I'd lost count of how many times my mother had tried to contact me through various means. Email addresses she found, new phone numbers, messages passed through coworkers, letters sent to my job site. All of them were variations of the same script. Please talk to us. We're family. Evan has changed. Laura's suffering. The baby is innocent. Don't you want to meet your niece? That last one almost made me laugh. My niece. The product of my brother screwing my fiancée in my bed. The child they'd tried to fraudulently claim was mine to extract money. My niece. The biological connection meant nothing. DNA wasn't loyalty. Blood wasn't respect. That baby was a stranger, born from betrayal, raised by people who'd proven they'd lie to anyone for convenience. I never responded to any of it, not because I was being petty or vindictive, but because responding would be acknowledging them as variables in my life. They weren't variables, they were solved equations. The answer was 0. 0 contact, 0 consideration, 0 forgiveness. Summer in Bozeman was perfect. 70-degree days, cold nights, mountains visible for 100 miles in every direction. I started hiking on weekends, 10-mile loops through the backcountry, seeing maybe one other person the whole day. The silence up there was different than cabin silence. It was older, deeper, like the mountains had been quiet for so long they'd forgotten how to make noise. I met a woman at the grocery store in July. She asked me to reach something on the top shelf. We chatted for maybe 5 minutes. She gave me her number. I thanked her and threw it away in the parking lot, not because she wasn't attractive or seemed problematic, but because I wasn't interested in opening that door. The cabin I'd built, literal and metaphorical, was single occupancy by design. August brought news through my cousin. Evan and Laura had split up. He'd moved back in with our parents alone. She'd taken the baby and moved back to her parents' place. The family was officially fractured. My sister had sided with nobody and stopped attending family events. My parents were in therapy. Evan was in therapy. Everyone was in therapy trying to fix something that wasn't broken. It was just poorly built from the start. September marked 2 years since Laura had shown up pregnant. 2 years since I'd nuked the bridges. I got a letter from her, forwarded through my cousin, who was apparently still in contact. It was handwritten, 6 pages. I read the first paragraph. It was an apology. It said she understood now what she'd done. It said she was sorry. It said she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know she'd changed. I burned it without reading the rest, not out of anger, but out of maintenance. Apologies are just words people use to make themselves feel better. They don't undo actions. They don't restore trust. They're emotional currency that only has value if you accept the transaction. I didn't accept it. The bridge I'd worked on opened in October with a small ceremony. Mayor came out, cut a ribbon, gave a speech about infrastructure and community. I stood in the back, watched cars start driving over something I'd helped build. It was the first bridge I'd been primary engineer on from foundation to finish. It would be there for 50 years minimum, probably 100 if maintained properly. Long after everyone involved in its construction was dead, it would still be standing, still be functional, still be serving its purpose. That's what I wanted from my life. To build things that lasted, to create value that couldn't be stolen or betrayed. Concrete and steel didn't lie. Math didn't cheat. Physics didn't choose favorites. The bridge didn't care about my family drama. It just stood there and did its job. I bought more land in November, 40 acres adjacent to my cabin property, paid cash again, started planning to build a house, a real one, designed exactly how I wanted it. Workshop, gun room, office, no guest bedroom, no accommodations for people who wouldn't be visiting, just me and the mountains and the perfect unbroken silence. Christmas came again, third one, without family. I cooked a prime rib, opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving, sat on my porch in 15-degree weather and watched the stars. No phone calls to ignore, no guilt to process, no obligations to fulfill. Just a man who'd successfully extracted himself from a toxic system and built something better from scratch. The scotch was smooth. The stars were bright. The cold was clean. I thought about Nathan from 3 years ago, the one who'd walked into his bedroom and found his life detonated. I wondered if he'd recognize me now. Probably not. That version was softer, more accommodating, more willing to believe that family meant something inherent. This version knew better. Family was a contract, and contracts could be broken. Loyalty was earned, not owed. Forgiveness was optional, not mandatory. The version of me sitting on that porch in Montana wasn't better or worse than the Austin version. He was just optimized for a different operating system, one where survival meant isolation and peace meant distance. I raised my glass to the mountains and the empty miles and the life I'd built from the ashes of the old one. Somewhere in Texas, in my parents' basement, Evan was probably drinking cheaper whiskey and wondering how it all went wrong. Somewhere else in Texas, Laura was probably putting a baby to sleep and regretting choices she could never undo. And somewhere in the extended family, people were probably still talking about when Nathan would forgive and come back. They could talk forever. The answer was never. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because going back would mean accepting less than I deserved. And I'd learned the hard way that accepting less than you deserve is how you end up walking into your own bedroom and finding betrayal waiting. The mountains didn't judge me. The cold didn't ask me to compromise. The bridge I'd built didn't require emotional labor. This was the life I'd chosen, and it was exactly the life I wanted. No drama, no scandal, no family betraying me, just the next project, the next calculation, the next perfect grouping at the range. Some people need connection to feel alive. I needed distance. Some people need forgiveness to move on. I needed consequences to have meaning. The math was simple. They'd broken the contract. I'd dissolved the partnership. They'd lost a resource. I'd gained freedom. I finished the scotch, went inside, locked the door, set the alarm. The cabin was warm. The bed was empty. The phone was silent. Everything was exactly as it should be. Tomorrow I'd start foundation work on the new house. Next week we'd begin a new bridge project connecting two valleys nobody thought could be connected. That's what I did now. Built bridges for strangers while burning the ones to family. And every morning I woke up in Montana, I did it without regret.